mountains of Afghanistan do not forgive mistakes. They are steep, merciless, silent witnesses to every decision made in the shadows of war. In June of 2005, high in the Hindu Kush Range, 4 American Navy SEALs were inserted into one of the most hostile territories on Earth. They carried no heavy armor, no overwhelming firepower, and no guarantee of extraction. What they carried instead was duty, discipline, and the belief that 4 highly trained men could complete a mission that would change the course of a dangerous insurgency. By the time the sun rose again, that belief would be tested against impossible odds. Only one of them would walk out alive. His name was Marcus Luttrell. In 2013, the world was introduced to this story through the film Lone Survivor, directed by Peter Berg and starring Mark Wahlberg. The movie was intense, brutal, and emotionally devastating, quickly becoming one of the highest-grossing war films of all time. But behind the explosions and cinematic chaos lay a real story, one that was, in many ways, even more unbelievable than what audiences saw on screen. The film was based on a 2007 nonfiction book titled Lone Survivor, the eyewitness account of Operation Red Wings and the lost heroes of SEAL Team 10, written by Marcus Luttrell himself. It was not a work of fiction. It was a survivor's testimony. Operation Red Wings was launched during the war in Afghanistan, at a time when U.S. forces were attempting to dismantle Taliban-aligned militias operating freely in the mountainous Kunar Province. The mission was simple in concept, but deadly in execution. A 4-man SEAL reconnaissance and surveillance team would be inserted deep into enemy territory to locate and observe a local militia leader named Ahmad Shah. Shah was believed to be responsible for multiple attacks against American forces and was known for using the terrain to his advantage. The objective was not to engage, but to gather intelligence that would allow U.S. forces to capture or eliminate him later. Silence, stealth, and invisibility were the keys to survival. Contrary to how the story was later portrayed, Ahmad Shah was not a high-ranking al-Qaeda operative, nor was he a close associate of Osama bin Laden. That narrative, repeated in early reports and even in the original book, was later disproven. In reality, Shah was the leader of a local Taliban-aligned anti-coalition militia. But that distinction mattered little to the men preparing for the mission. Whether global terrorist or local warlord, Shah represented a deadly threat, and Operation Red Wings was designed to stop him. The SEAL team selected for the mission consisted of Lieutenant Michael Murphy, the team leader, Petty Officer 2nd Class Danny Dietz, Sonar Technician 2nd Class Matthew Axelson, and Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Marcus Luttrell. Each man was highly trained, combat-tested, and trusted with one another's lives. On the night of insertion, they were fast-roped from a helicopter into the dark, unforgiving mountainside. Almost immediately, the terrain worked against them. Dense forests, sharp cliffs, and loose rock made movement slow and dangerous. Communications were unreliable. Extraction would be difficult. But none of that was unexpected. What came next was, as the team established a concealed observation position overlooking structures believed to belong to Shah and his fighters, fate intervened in the form of 3 unarmed Afghan goat herders. The civilians stumbled directly into the SEALs' hidden position. In an instant, the mission changed. The team faced an impossible moral and tactical dilemma. If they killed the civilians, they would violate the rules of engagement and their own moral code. If they released them, there was a strong chance the herders would alert Taliban forces nearby. There was no easy answer, no perfect solution. After intense debate, the team made a decision that reflected who they were as soldiers and as men. They let the civilians go. Not long after, the mountains came alive. Taliban fighters, loyal to Ahmad Shah, moved swiftly and decisively. The SEALs were discovered and ambushed by an overwhelming enemy force, estimated to be dozens, possibly over 100 fighters, using the high ground, automatic weapons, and rocket-propelled grenades. The firefight erupted with ferocity. Bullets tore through trees and stone. Explosions echoed across the valleys. The 4 SEALs fought back with everything they had, but the terrain offered little protection and the enemy numbers kept growing. Petty Officer Danny Dietz was the first to fall. He was caught in the brunt of the initial assault, struck by multiple rounds. Despite his injuries, he continued to fight. Marcus Luttrell tried desperately to drag him down the mountainside to safety, but the Taliban fire was relentless. As Luttrell pulled him through the rocks and brush, Dietz was shot in the head and killed instantly. The loss was devastating, but the battle did not pause for grief. Lieutenant Michael Murphy understood the situation immediately. The team was pinned down, outnumbered, and running out of options. Communications were failing, but Murphy made a decision that would define his legacy. Leaving cover, he deliberately exposed himself on the mountainside to get a signal on his satellite phone. He knew exactly what it meant. Standing in the open, under heavy enemy fire, Murphy called headquarters and successfully transmitted their situation, requesting immediate support. He was shot multiple times during the call. Mortally wounded, he still completed the transmission. Moments later, Lieutenant Michael Murphy died from his injuries. He would later be awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions. With Murphy and Dietz gone, only Marcus Luttrell and Matthew Axelson remained. Axelson had already been severely wounded during the firefight, shot in the chest, but refusing to stop fighting. The two men continued to resist as long as they could, returning fire, moving downhill through the chaos, desperately trying to survive against an enemy that seemed endless. Axelson would eventually suffer a fatal gunshot wound to the head hours after the operation began. He died fighting. Marcus Luttrell was now alone. Badly wounded, exhausted, and hunted, Luttrell began a desperate escape through the mountains, pursued by Taliban fighters determined to finish what they started. How he survived, who helped him, and how the story truly ended is where the legend of the lone survivor is born. Marcus Luttrell should not have survived. By every measurable standard of war, blood loss, broken bones, enemy numbers, terrain, exhaustion, his survival defied probability. Alone, wounded, and barely able to move, Luttrell stumbled through the Afghan mountains for hours, pursued by Taliban fighters who believed the last American SEAL was still alive. His body was shattered, his spine fractured, his legs barely functioning. Yet what ultimately saved his life was not a weapon or an airstrike, but an ancient code of honor that existed long before modern warfare. Luttrell was discovered by local villagers, led by a man named Muhammad Ghalib. Despite knowing that sheltering an American soldier would likely bring violent retaliation from the Taliban, Ghalib made a decision rooted in Pashtunwali, the traditional Pashtun code of hospitality and protection. Luttrell was hidden, fed, treated for his wounds, and guarded while Ghalib sent word to U.S. forces. For days, the villagers risked everything. Taliban fighters came searching. Threats were made, but they did not surrender him. In that remote valley, humanity outweighed fear. Eventually, U.S. Army Rangers and Afghan Special Forces located Luttrell and carried out the rescue. Contrary to how it is shown in the film, there was no final massive firefight where American troops stormed in under heavy fire. Luttrell was not pulled from the brink of death, with his heart stopping mid-rescue. In reality, the extraction was tense but controlled. Luttrell was conscious. He was stable enough to sit, drink tea, and speak with the villagers who had saved his life. There were no dramatic last breaths, only exhaustion, pain, and relief. He said goodbye to Ghalib and the others, fully aware that their act of courage might cost them dearly. The film Lone Survivor ends soon after the rescue, but Marcus Luttrell's story did not. After extensive medical treatment and rehabilitation, Luttrell did something few would expect. He returned to active duty. Despite severe injuries sustained during Operation Red Wings, including spinal fractures that never fully healed, he redeployed in 2006 as part of SEAL Team 5, serving in Ramadi, Iraq, during Operation Iraqi Freedom. It was a decision driven not by glory, but by loyalty to the men he lost and the mission they believed in. His body, however, could only endure so much. Further injuries followed. His knees were severely damaged, compounding the trauma from Afghanistan. Eventually, the physical toll made continued service impossible. Marcus Luttrell was honorably discharged and awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor in the U.S. Navy. In 2007, he finally returned home, not as a movie hero, but as a survivor carrying the weight of fallen brothers. In the years that followed, Luttrell chose to transform trauma into purpose. In 2010, he founded the Lone Survivor Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting wounded service members, veterans, and their families, those living with the invisible scars of war as much as the physical ones. The foundation became a living extension of the promise he carried out of the mountains, that the sacrifice of Operation Red Wings would not be forgotten. As powerful as the film Lone Survivor is, it is important to understand where cinema reshaped reality. Some changes were made to heighten drama, others to honor the families of the fallen. One of the most debated moments, the decision regarding the goat herders, was portrayed differently. In the book, Luttrell described a vote among the team. This was later disputed. Director Peter Berg clarified that Lieutenant Michael Murphy made the decision himself, without a vote, and the film reflects that version out of respect for Murphy's leadership and legacy. The scale of the battle is another point of contention. The movie suggests around 50 Taliban fighters. The book claimed between 80 and 200. Later accounts, including official military citations, estimate that between 30 and 40 enemy fighters engaged the team. Marcus Luttrell himself later stated that even those numbers might be high. What remains undisputed, however, is that the SEALs were vastly outnumbered, ambushed, and trapped in terrain that favored the enemy completely. Other elements, such as the final cinematic firefight, the destruction of Ghalab's home, and Ghalab being wounded, were fictional additions. They did not happen in real life, but they were never meant to replace the truth. They were meant to communicate the emotional weight of what 4 men endured in the mountains of Afghanistan. Because in the end, Lone Survivor is not about numbers. It is not about how many fighters were on the mountain or how many bullets were fired. It is about duty, sacrifice, brotherhood, and the cost of moral choices made under impossible pressure. It is about Lieutenant Michael Murphy, Danny Dietz, and Matthew Axelson, men who did not come home. And it is about Marcus Luttrell, the man who carried their story back with him. The mountain took 3 lives that day, but it did not take their legacy. And as long as their story is told, none of them truly stand alone.